Mice and Men with Cold World, and this is an album that has all of the capability to perhaps be as divisive as Restoring Force before it also was. It was an album where it seemed like the band was morphing right before the very eyes of the listeners, almost as though they were witnessing the group that they fell in love with changing over into something else as the songs on this album progressed one by one. However, on Cold World, this morphology is now complete. It's no longer one that feels like it has as much in the way of a changing process. Instead, it has a couple of things really focused in mind. Of Mice and Men is no longer a caterpillar. They are now a full-fledged post-millennium nu metal band. Oh, yeah. I know that's going to get a lot of hate. I know that's going to get a lot of, no, they're not. Listen to this album and try to tell me that they're not. Well, they're just a Mice and Men. You want to categorize everything else? Here we go. Well, here's the thing. I mean, post-millennium nu metal, which basically just means any nu metal that happened after the turn of the millennium, 2001, 2004, whatever, it's not really all of that bad at times. It just has a lot of derivative nature to it. You know, if you heard one band of this variety, chances are you've heard a good, I would say, 75% of the genre, and you understand what it's all about. That's the reason why it's so alluring to some people, because they know what they're expecting. But with Game of War, you don't expect what you get. That's one of the big things about this. This is one that, for the title of it, you would almost expect a lot of aggression, something that would really sort of thrust things along, but instead, it feels very muted. It has a more, internal effect to it. It's instead one that's really categorized by its softness and by some of its influence that seems to be taking some cues from a little bit of post-grunge, either that or trying to emulate the darkness of some of the grunge movements, mainstays such as Alice in Chains, which it doesn't exactly work out quite as nicely, considering the overall composition just feels a little bit janted. It doesn't feel like it has, it doesn't match up with what the title of the song or what the lyricism really seems to be suggesting. It's kind of interesting in that regard, and overall this song is not horrible, but as an introductory song, as a first track on this disc, it really comes off as a curious decision, considering you would think that a band wants to kind of lead with one of their best feet and lead with a little bit more in the way of energy, and as opposed to this, which feels a little bit more suited for the second half of an album. The Lie and Real is a little bit more what you would expect from the beginnings of a post-millennium nu metal album or nu metal band, considering it really follows the playbook. It follows even the sounds of the playbook almost to perfection. You could almost look back into, the earliest tomes of the 2000s, maybe utter names that you haven't uttered in a long time, such as From Zero, and you would all of a sudden have an accurate snapshot of what The Lie and Real basically feels like they're all about. Hell, you could look at the, soundtracks to any WWE pay-per-view from the Ruthless Aggression era, and chances are this song would be perfectly painted among the others that were really hanging in the gallery of those musical choices, and it would make perfect sense. For the record, The Lie and Real are two of the strongest tracks off of this album for that reason, because they basically went full tilt boogie with this idea. They went all in, and remember how I told you that this album was not nearly as sort of janted, or you couldn't see the morphology as the album was progressing? That's because this album doesn't feel like it's leading towards something for the future of this band. This album just feels like they decided to just toss in a bunch of different ideas for variety's sake, and it comes off as a bit of a witch's brew, and by witch's brew, believe me, I mean a bit of a ridiculous just mess. It does come off as a real mess, because Like a Ghost and Contagious right after that really feel like they don't follow up these ideas very well, with Like a Ghost being one of the longest tracks on the album at nearly 5 minutes in length. We then get a short little interlude before we get into Pain, which is one of the first singles off of this release, The Hunger and Relentless. By this point in time, the band is kind of jostling its way through a couple of different styles. They're going with some of that nu metal ferocity, or that nu metal, pump up, whatever you want to call it. There's some growling, there's some screaming that you hear. It's kind of muted, as of Mice and Men usually is. They follow a little bit more along the tempered variety of that. It's not something that is always going to be present. The metalcore is not really there very much at all anymore with this group. It's instead really pushing a little bit more toward that more alternative, more nu metal philosophy. I know I'm saying nu metal a lot. It's just There's no better way to describe it. It's really just, it's how it is. I'm sorry. And you know what you're getting is different tempo. You're getting a little bit of different pace. It's like they're trying a couple of different things on this disc, but it just doesn't feel like it works. It doesn't feel cohesive. This is an album that does not feel like it has a real identity to it. Cold World seems to indicate that there are various races still alive, and they are all extremely different, and none of them wish to interact with one another, because whenever interactions do occur, that's where the problems really begin. And this is really present whenever you have songs that are attempting to really jostle in a little bit of the new metal with some of that alternative philosophy. It just doesn't feel like it has as much purity. Of Mice and Men don't feel like they have much of an identity on this record. Instead, just trying to really, I guess, thrust themselves in a direction that is not easy to identify. Again, going back to songs like The Lie and Real, you almost wish that the whole album resembled that more than what you get. This is a muted album in many ways, but in other ways it's one where its real primary sin is something that you have to draw a fine line with, and that's, you know, trying to jostle in a good bit of variety, a good bit of experimentation. You know, there is a possibility, there is a potential within those sayings that you go too far. And on this album, I can't really even decide if Of Mice and Men have gone too far with that, or if they didn't go far enough. This feels almost incomplete. In fact, The Lie and Real, even those two songs, they stop so quickly, their end comes so abruptly, that they almost feel incomplete themselves. And overall, this is an album that just feels very lost within itself. And it's a real shame, considering The Lie and Real and some of the elements of the first half of this disc really showcase that this is a morphology that could end up being pretty enjoyable, at least to the point where you could sit there and listen to the record. You may not necessarily think of them as the greatest band ever anymore, considering there's many bands that sound like them within that style, but you could at least power your way through and say, I liked listening to that. It was a good 30 to 40 minutes. This feels kind of like a mess, almost like the new Asking Alexandria record or the new Bring Me the Horizon record, where it feels like these transitions are kind of slow burning their way into existence, and it's not kind of happening with enough rapidity to really create an album that feels like it's changing the game, or an album that feels like it's changing their own personal musical philosophy. It instead feels like it's very tentative, and that tentative nature bleeds out of these tracks, bleeds out of these songs. It becomes distracting. You almost wish that you could just say to Austin and the boys, just go with it, just go with it. I sound like I'm very disappointed in this album, and that's because I kind of am. This is a disc that I think had a lot of great potential and terrific ideas in mind, and the execution is just where the flaws are. I think that they had a lot of creativity really abound for this album that got a bit misappropriated. Either that, or these were concepts that had a tremendous amount of real potential and just seemed to fall a little short. They didn't know how to fully harness some of the great things that they did introduce. It does showcase that Of Mice and Men have a diversity, and showcases that they're going to be able to unleash that diversity on future records, and it's going to actually boost up those records if they're amid some better material. But this is an album where it's very, very hard to agree with there being a lot of strong material on it, because there just isn't. This is a 68 out of 100, a real big disappointment. I wasn't keen on Restoring Force, but I wanted to touch Of Mice and Men again because there were things that they did there that I thought were very excellent, and I think that they are a band of this new generation that has some real potential, and some of that was showed on this album, but on a full collective effort, it just didn't happen. I don't know what you think about this. What do you think of Cold World by Of Mice and Men? I know I kind of gave it the little poopy treatment, but it ain't sunshine and roses all the time here in happy review land. So let me know what you think in the comments below. My name is coverkillernation. We still have a lot to talk about this weekend, a lot of chances to redeem ourselves. We have a lovely graphic! Yeah, it's not that lovely looking. It's probably about a 68 out of 100 as well. So definitely stay tuned for that. I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care.